I'm recording my homily for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the difference between being a fan, so think of like sports or people who follow some really popular musicians, so they're a fan of them, right? So the difference between being a fan and being a disciple. Now, when we come to church, in some ways it looks like we're fans of God, right? We're fans of the church. We're doing things that fans kind of do, right? So you think of a Seahawks game, what people are doing in the stands, there's this camaraderie, they're all there together watching the action in front of them, and they might even be singing or chanting. And so you think, well, that's kind of like liturgical stuff. That's like stuff we do kind of in the Mass, right? But I want to argue at least, not I say argue, but present the idea that as disciples, we're actually the opposite of fans. We're very different than fans, very different motivations, okay? So I'm going to go into that a little bit, and then we'll go into the gospel, and then I have a story to share, just to kind of bring this all out. Okay, so fans tend to follow something that's popular, something that everybody else is really into. We get swept up in the emotions in the moment, right? So whether, again, sporting event or some superstar musician or something like that, it's something popular. And as soon as that objective, that idol, that little god, whatever it is, as soon as it stops being popular, we stop following. Okay? So it's kind of based on popularity, all right? I see this at Mass, right? So we just had the first weekend of the NFL, and so lots of people wearing Seahawks jerseys, okay? So you say, okay, they're fans, right? They're fans of the Seahawks, with the hope that they're going to do good, and it's kind of popular, right? If nobody liked the Seahawks, more than likely, one person's not going to wear a Seahawks jersey to Mass, right? But because they're popular, people wear them. Okay. Popularity, so the person who is the objective, the idol of all this popularityness, they want to avoid controversy, right? They don't want to get involved in controversy. They'll only support something that's popular because they don't want to lose their fans. Because if they support something that's controversial, they're going to lose their fans. So they're only going to support things that are not controversial, okay? So we can think of that in the church, or even just as people, how we believe something is true or right, but we're afraid to say it because maybe it's not popular. Then we're looking for fans. We're not looking at being disciples, right? Okay, so in the fan has an idol, right? And they are the idolizer, okay? So what they're doing is they're putting somebody up on a pedestal, and they love the fact that they can put them up on the pedestal. But we don't realize sometimes when, as fans, we actually begin to enslave ourselves. You can kind of see this when somebody's like really, really popular, and you see how the teens are all swept up. It's almost like there's this, they become slaves to this idol. They're going to dress like them, they're going to act like them, they're going to do everything like them, right? And so if they say something political, even though they don't know anything about politics, we're going to believe them because they've been swept up in this idolization of this person, okay? In a fan tends to enjoy putting the objective person up on the pedestal higher than everybody else. And so the fans tend to create an injustice or a discrepancy of dignity. There's no longer an equality. Especially the person who is the idol, they want to be seen as being above everyone else. They don't, and so they try to create that in social media. I'm better, I'm smarter, I'm more talented, I'm more beautiful, whatever it is. But I try to create a disparity of equality, that I'm better than everybody else. Okay. Typically, you'll see these things in entertainment, okay? Entertainment, or even in politics, because in politics, you have to have fans. You have to have people who will vote for you. And so you have to pander to that. That's the way our political system is set up. And people who stick to truth and stick to a mission, they may be able to win on that, but it's usually because it's popular at the time. So anyways, right? Okay. Now, a disciple, if you look at Jesus, he's very different. He didn't go around looking to be popular. He didn't go around trying to become the superstar. He didn't have a, what do you call a person who supports, he didn't have an agent, right? He didn't have an agent. He didn't have a whole effort behind him to make him look popular. So he didn't do that. When Jesus went around healing people, he didn't bring them up on a stage and say, hey, look at me, look at what I can do. He did the opposite. So look at the gospel today, or the gospel this weekend. So he's healing the man who's deaf and mute, right? Now the very first thing it says is that he pulls him aside from the crowd. He pulls him away from the crowd and speaks to him face to face, but away from everybody else. That's the opposite of what the idol does, right? So Jesus didn't come, even Jesus, the Son of God, he didn't come to be idolized. He didn't come to be the idol. He's up on the pedestal. He breaks through all those boundaries and he comes face to face with us. Now, the other thing that's very unique about Jesus is that he comes and he begins to look for the person who's had their dignity lowered, who's been robbed of their dignity, and he immediately enters into their life, face to face, equally, brother to brother, brother to sister. The idol doesn't do that. The popular person doesn't do that. They want to create the disparity. Jesus wants to bridge it. Now, he's setting an example for us, right? That's what's so important about this, is that he's our model. When he encounters this man who's deaf and he wants to heal him, it's interesting how he does it. It says, it's descriptive on some level. He says, he puts his finger into his ears, right? He presses his fingers into his ears, and you get some sense of, he's not afraid of this man. He's not afraid of entering. Maybe this man's like homeless, dingy, dirty. I don't know, it doesn't say that, but he's not afraid of him. He's like a doctor, right? The doctor is not afraid to touch the body, to see what's wrong, to probe, to do the things that's necessary to heal. And so he's doing that. He sticks his finger into his ears. And then it gets even more descriptive, where he says he wants to heal his muteness, so he can't speak. So he spits. It doesn't say how he does it, but he spits. I'm imagining he spits into his hand, and then he touches the man's tongue with his spit. Now, how many of us do that, right? But it's descriptive of someone who is completely in tune and equal and present to the person. And there's no fear of getting dirty in order to help this person. The thought that came to me when I was thinking about this was, he's like a paramedic, right? So paramedics get a call and they hear and they say, "Ooh, that's in a dangerous part of the neighborhood, and that's there could be some danger there, and it's there was a violent act, and so it means I'm going to get blood on me, or whatever." And so the paramedics say, "You know what? I don't think I'm going to go." Paramedic doesn't do that, right? Paramedic dives into the situation. And sometimes they get dirty, sometimes it's dangerous, but they go in because they're going in to heal, or at least to help the person be able to find healing, right? To bring them to the hospital. Never saw any paramedics get some kind of claim to fame for just doing what they do, right? They're not the superstars, and yet they do more important work than most people in the entertainment industry. The other thing about being a disciple is that we're not clinging to a message that's simply popular, right? In season and out of season. We have a message that sometimes may be popular because it's truth, and we all desire truth. But if the culture turns on its head and begins to see truth as being detrimental, then we must be faithful to the truth even when we're not popular. And so that's the difference between being a fan and being a disciple. So right now it's not very popular to be Catholic because of all the bad stuff that's happened, right? And so you're going to see on some level the difference between a fan of the church and a disciple of the church. I've had some people talk to me and they say, it's horrible what we're seeing and what we're going through and what's happened, but it doesn't shake my faith in Jesus Christ, nor in my love for the church as the body of Christ. So that's a disciple. Disciples will always want to bridge the gap between the disparity of dignity, and they see people as their brothers and sisters. That's my brother, right? That's my sister. That's why I need to help them. All right. The other thing about Jesus is, he didn't come to put himself up on the pedestal, but he does the opposite. He's constantly looking for the lowly. God is constantly looking for the lowly to raise them up. So on Saturday, we celebrated the birth, the nativity of Mary. Well, Mary, in her ordinariness, in her lowliness, right? She even uses that word, in my lowliness, God has raised me up. That's what God does. He takes from their lowly status, and then he raises them up, and then they become the example of what it means to be a disciple. He doesn't take somebody who's popular or who's hip or who's whatever, who's got lots of fans and say, hey, look at this example of faith. He doesn't do that. Sometimes we're tempted to do that. We want to, even in the Catholic Church, we want to say, oh, hey, look at this NFL athlete who's Catholic, right? Well, all we're doing is creating fans. We're not creating disciples by doing that. We have to do what Jesus did. We go to the lowly. When I was in high school, I remember there was this time where, so the majority of people in the high school where I went were Catholic because the majority were Hispanic. I was in Texas, right? And then the Mormons started to kind of come in, and you were seeing some more of the Mormons in the community, and they were evangelizing. And so in the high school, the rumor was, and I can't vouch for its complete validity, but the rumor was that in the high school they wanted to evangelize by converting the quarterback of the football team and the lead cheerleader. And if they could get them to convert, then it was like they instantaneously would get tons of people. Why? Because people look up to the quarterback on the football team. In high school, we were all kind of shallow, right? And so it's like, ooh, he's the quarterback, right? Or the lead cheerleader, or so, she's beautiful, whatever it is. And so everybody will seem kind of like follow like lemmings, okay? But I say the problem with that is all you're doing is creating fans. You're not creating disciples. That's not how Jesus did it, right? He didn't walk along the shore of Galilee looking for somebody who's popular. He found dirty, dingy fishermen. Sorry, I should edit that out. Fishermen. He looked for the lowly. Look how Jesus came into the world. Born in a stable. He came as one who was lowly. All right. So, speaking of that, oh, that's gross. Somebody stuck their gum on the pew. That is gross. All right, I'm getting distracted here. Okay. I guess Jesus wasn't afraid to get a little messy either, right? Okay. So the story, I just finished reading a book, or almost finished reading a book, on Father Augustine Tolton. Father Augustine Tolton was the first African-American Catholic priest in the United States. Now, there were a few others before him who were, as we say, they were half African-American and half white, but he was the first one who was like fully African-American and was ordained a priest and served in the Catholic Church in the United States. And his story is really phenomenal. So he was born into a family that they were slaves. So his father and his mother were slaves. Therefore, the children were slaves. Obviously, they were African American. His father, whose name was Peter, must have been a good guy, right? And decided that he was going to go off and fight in the Civil War. So this is in the 1860s or earlier than that, but in the 1800s, right? And he tells Augustine, his son, he tells him and his family, he tells him, I have to do this because I want you to be free. I want you to be free. And so he goes off and fights in the Civil War. Well, Peter never comes back. And so his dad, Augustine's dad, never came home because he died in battle. His mom eventually decides that they're going to flee their slavery. They're going to flee the plantation where they were enslaved, and they're going to go to a free state. And so they end up doing that. In the middle of the night, she takes her 2 kids, and she flees to a free state, and risks all kinds of things to do it. Now the thing is, when somebody was a slave of the plantation owners, they did not have a choice of what religion they belonged to. They belonged to the religion of the plantation owners. So in this case, the plantation owners were Catholic, and so all the kids and everybody who worked for them was also baptized in Catholic. And so Augustine's family was all Catholic. So when they fled, they continued to live their faith as Catholics because they believed in it. They felt like it was true, right? Now, where they went, they still were not very well received. The black Catholics were expected to sit in the back of the church, right? There was kind of this segregatedness. They were not even really welcome. There were often snotty things would be said to them, things like that. But they wanted to practice their faith. And the interesting thing is many of the priests were immigrants, and so they did not understand all this kind of like white hostility towards the blacks, and so they loved having the black Catholics there. But the people often didn't necessarily receive that. So Augustine's this little boy, and they come to church. Well, the priest immediately notices there's something different about Augustine. Very pious, very holy. He would want to stay in the church to pray. You know, how many kids do that? How many kids say, I want to stay in the church to pray? Okay? But he would do that. It's like his heart was just somewhere just in tune to God. When he was a little bit older, he received his first communion when he was 16 years old. And the day of his first communion, after Mass, he didn't want to leave. He just wanted to stay in the church. And so he stayed for a while. And everybody went home. And then after, he kind of goes outside, and he's just walking around the church. He's just taking it in. He was saying, I just can't believe I received the body and blood of Jesus Christ. He was just so full of joy. He didn't want to leave. Well, the priest notices that he's kind of walking around the church. And so he goes out there and he talks to Augustine. Now, he knows Augustine, right? He says, Augustine, we need to talk. He says, Augustine, have you ever thought about being a priest? Now, Augustine is like, that's not possible. So the priest says, well, why is that not possible? Augustine says, because I'm black. There's no black priest. Right? I mean, look how we're treated. And the priest says, it's possible. It is possible. And Augustine completely just kind of opens his heart to that. And he's like, oh my goodness, this is awesome. So the priest decides to get Augustine into the Catholic school, right? And he would be the first black student in the Catholic school. Well, they get him into the Catholic school. Well, there's this uprising because all the other families did not want him in there. And so the priest fights to keep him in there. But after a while, the sisters that are teaching and the priest, and even Augustine's mom realizes that it's not working. Because the people aren't ready for it, right? They're part of the culture. The culture was that you're prejudiced, that you're racist. And so they probably knew the teachings of Jesus, but they had not really been living them. And so they were like fans. Well, the priest, who's a good guy, but realizes that if he keeps Augustine in the school, everybody's going to leave and the school's going to be destroyed. And so he caters to the fans, the popular thing. He feels helpless. So he tells Augustine, he says, look, Augustine, the school's not working out, but here's what I'm going to do. I promise you that I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you. And so he took him under his wing. Now that priest would not stay there forever, right? And so he would always tell every subsequent priest that would come through that you need to take responsibility for this young man and you need to teach him. There's something very special about him. And they did. The number of really, really good priests that he encountered was phenomenal. And so over the years, as he's growing up, he begins to learn, well, many of the priests were German, so he learns German fluently. He learns Latin fluently. He learns Greek fluently. He learns philosophy, theology, literature, the humanities, all these things. And he just eats it up. He just loves it. Because in his mind, all of it leads to what he desires. He wants to be a priest. He wants to serve Jesus. He wants to spread the gospel. And things were relatively good. But it comes time for him to enter the seminary. And so the priest, the pastor, applies on his behalf to all the seminaries in the United States. Why did he have to apply to all the seminaries? Because every single one of them turned Augustine down. Why? Because he's black. And when the priest would ask for a reason, they would say, we're simply not ready for that level of controversy. You see, so the idol and the fans, the popularity movement, right? The superstar and his fans, he's never going to do anything controversial because he doesn't want to lose his fans. And so that's what's happening there. They don't want to lose their fans. There's truth, but they're not going to cling to the truth because they'll lose their fans. Because we don't have disciples. So we need his disciples who cling to the truth, whether it's popular or not. Remember Jesus, when there's that moment when he's been talking about the Eucharist, and those of you who receive my body and my blood will have life in you. And then the disciples who are following him at that point say, this is a hard saying. He says, well, are you going to leave me? And they left him. Because at that point, they were simply fans. He was doing miracles, he was popular, but now it was getting hard. Now it was controversial. And they left him. Even the disciples will leave Jesus, right? So they have to be purified of that fanness. They're not just there to idolize Jesus, but they're there to be his disciple, to be his brother, to carry the mission. So the story of Augustine continues, and every single thing the priest tried to do to get him into a religious order or to get him in the seminary, everybody's turning him down. Augustine becomes really despondent, really down, and he's starting to kind of go down that path mentally, like, this is never going to happen. I'm never going to be a priest. And he's really, really depressed. And his faith is strong, but he's really, really struggling. So finally, the priest, after a number of things, he tries one last thing. He has a connection in Rome. And so he writes a letter to, I think it was a cardinal in Rome, somebody he knew. It was like a personal connection. But he didn't tell Augustine, because he was afraid that if it was a no, it would just destroy Augustine. It would just destroy whatever hope he had left. And so he didn't tell him. But as time goes on, he's beginning to see Augustine just kind of slipping in his enthusiasm for the faith. And so he finally goes to Augustine. He says, look, Augustine, I just want to let you know this. I sent a letter to Rome. I sent a letter to a friend. And I'm asking him to see if there's anything he can do. I just wanted you to know that. So Augustine kind of perks up a little bit. Well, one day, this priest comes running into Augustine's workplace. So Augustine worked in this factory. It was like a tobacco factory or something. But he comes running in with this letter and he says, Augustine, they've accepted you. Now, what did they accept him to? To one of the most prestigious seminaries in Rome. And so a little Augustine from a little podunk village who couldn't even be accepted by any of the little podunk seminaries in the United States. You remember, this is way back in the 1800s. The seminaries would not have been, huge institutions per se. He's accepted by one of the highest seminaries in Rome. And so little Augustine ends up going to Rome and studying for the priesthood. Jesus sees somebody who's low, and he raises them up high. That's how the Catholic Church works. At its best, that's how the Catholic Church works, because that's how the Holy Spirit works. Now, I'm not going to go into the rest of the life of Father Augustine, right? He becomes a priest. because his priesthood looks, I know you can't see it in the video right now, but it looks like the cross, okay? But he talked about his time in the seminary in Rome, and he said it was amazing because he was studying with people from all different countries, from Africa and from Japan and from the Far East and from America. And he said it was the first time in his life where people loved him and respected him who weren't part of his family, right? Or wasn't his pastor. He said it was the most beautiful time in his life. And he was going to need that, right? Because God was going to ask him later on to be a disciple, which means there was going to be some tough times ahead. But it's beautiful. God takes the lowly and he raises them up. All right. God bless you. Take care.